Hello everyone and welcome to the demonstration video. In this video we're going over Access Chapter 1. So you've already had some experience with Excel and now we're going to dive straight into Access, which can be one of the trickiest parts of the course. That's why I only have just a couple of projects for it, and also just give yourself some time to go through this projects. Again, it could take a little more than, let's say, the other ones that you've gone through. Even if you felt that you were already familiar with Microsoft Word and Excel, Access is a different ballpark, so just give yourself plenty of time to complete these. Okay, one other note about Access. If you are using a MacBook, so something with Mac OS, an Apple device, you will not be able to use the Access application. Unfortunately, Access does not work on Apple devices. So when you come across your projects, just please make sure either if you have another device to use, make sure you use that. You do have to download the software. Make sure you go back to that announcement or the week 1 resources to find the download. But you could use another device, or please make sure you are looking in the syllabus. There's instructions for lab hours. You could schedule lab hours to go on campus to use the computers, which do have access for you to use for free. Okay, with that disclaimer out of the way, let's get into Access. Of course, if you want to follow along, the skeleton notes are here in the resources page. We're not going to download these documents yet. So again, if you're following along, we're not going to use these quite yet. I do have some explanations to go through. Okay, let's go ahead and get started with our trusty little Paint software so I could explain a couple of things. Okay, so Access is an application to create databases. More specifically, in your readings, you may have seen something that looks like this, DBMS. That stands for Database Management System. In short, databases is how we keep track of data in a more structured manner. You may be wondering, Ms. Ojeda, can't we just use Excel for that? Doesn't it hold data as well? Yes, we could, but it's going to be a lot more trickier. I'll show you in a moment how tricky that can be, and especially in Chapter 2 for Access, using Excel for certain real-world applications is not very viable. But just note, databases is how we keep track of data in a structured manner, especially data that relates to each other. Okay, at least for this chapter, some terminology you must know is how databases are made up. We need some terms for you to understand how to actually navigate Access. For instance, one of the first things you need to know is databases are all made up of tables. Again, excuse my writing, I'm not doing so good with the mouse here. Okay, so tables is just how you remembered it from Excel. Typically, we structure data in a series of rows and columns. There we go. So I'm just going to do a couple of rows and columns here. But tables represent data for specific things. For example, maybe in this example, we're keeping track of students. So one table can be information for students and students only. Databases isn't just one table. Notice the S at the end. You could have multiple tables. So if we have one table for students, again, that information holds information just for students. Another one could be dedicated for teachers or instructors. That will be a separate table away from this, which has information for the instructors. It kind of starts sounding like different sheets for Excel, but again, there's a reason why we do this. Okay, but terminology-wise, your tables is a single table in which we are putting information for related data. Now, there are different terminologies we have for columns and rows. For example, with Excel, you could organize your columns and rows however you want. You could have categories as rows or categories as columns. However, when it comes to tables and databases, there's a lot more structured format. So for instance, your columns, whatever goes up and down, is known as your fields. What fields do is they indicate different characteristics or different data that we're holding within this table. So for instance, if we're keeping track of students, maybe we want their first name and last name. So this field, so this column would be the first name. I'm just going to do FN for first name. The next column here, the next field can be the last name. And maybe this one over here, this last one, is the student ID. I'm going to indicate that as a SID. So fields are always going to be your columns. I'm going to just do cols as shorthand. And you could keep on adding how many fields you want, depending on what kind of information you're keeping track of. So fields are the first thing you have to actually structure in a database. There's a lot of cool features that database management systems such as Access providing to structure these fields a lot more, just to make sure that information is not just thrown in randomly. So you have your fields, and then we also have, there we go, we have our records. Write that down. So records are your rows, and those are each entity that we're keeping track of. So in the case of if this table is keeping track of students, then that means each row, each record is a single student. So for instance, let me start using another color. There we go. So if this first row, this first record is for myself, maybe let's say I'm a student, then we put in the information all related to myself in the following row. There we go. And then we just keep going on and on with any other students that we're adding in. So maybe we have a Bob here, and so on. And it could just keep going on and on. So another student would be here, and it doesn't have to be just stuck to 3 records. You could just keep adding on with the fields going down. Okay. So just keep that in track. Records is the entities we're keeping track of. In the case of students, each record would be 1 student. Fields is the data we're keeping track of for each record. So if we want to know the name of the student and their student ID, you'd need a field for the first name, last name, student ID. If you want a separate field for the middle name, you'd have to create a new column, a new field, and any other information, how many classes they have, how many credits they're going to get for those courses. Those would be different fields along. This is the structure that occurs in all tables in databases. So you'll see this with Access, where again, you can't be as creative as you were with Excel. You are stuck to your records and your fields. Okay. I'm going to give a quick explanation for why we use Access instead of Excel. I'll go over this again when we go into chapter 2, but if you want a quick explanation right now, I'm going to do it. Again, you could skip to chapter 2 if you want to see it. The example I like to use for databases is Amazon. So the majority of you may have experience with using Amazon or some other website in which you are buying products from. They all work pretty similarly, and you'll see even if I'm just focused on Amazon, a lot of what I'm showing also applies to those websites that you're using. So in the case of Amazon, again, it's a big corporation and they need some way to keep track of all of their data. So there's you as the customer. There we go. Again, sorry for my writing, just bear with me. But there's you as a customer, and we need our own table to keep track of every single customer that Amazon has, every account. So remember, your records would be different, in this case, different accounts, and then just a bunch of different data for each account. Okay. So there's different customers, and maybe one of these fields has a list of orders that you're keeping track of. You'll notice that with a lot of these websites, you could see previous order histories that you have, and you'll usually have some kind of code. It could be a random mix of letters or numbers, but each order can have different codes, and you'll notice that there's different items related to it. So what these codes are is actually relating to another table that they're keeping track of, full of different orders. This is why when you want to return on certain products, or if you have an issue with the order, they always ask you for the code, because they need to look in their own database for this code somewhere along this table. So we have a separate table for customers and a separate table for orders, and then again, this is a long list of different orders, different records for orders. The customers have a long list of different accounts for customer accounts. But again, we find this code in the orders, and then even then, orders have other information for it. So of course we want to keep track of the code for that order. That's how we identify it, kind of like your ID. How much was that order, and even what kind of items were in it. Let me find another color. There we go. But items are also linked to the orders, and that could be a whole separate field. And how items are displayed, again, it's its own table. There's different information for each item. You'll notice that there's things like descriptions, the price, the name of the item, who is selling the item if it's a different company, and so on. So there's a whole different database for the items, and again, there is a lot more. Notice items have comments. Maybe one of them is comments. Oh, that's not a good color. But maybe one of them is comments or different reviews, which again is its own table. Its own table, its own list. And then sometimes you want to know who made those comments, and guess what? It leads all the way back to the customers, because you need certain accounts to make these comments. So there is a lot more that is kept track of. Notice there's just tables upon tables to keep track of everything. And all of this can't be just done with Excel. Emphasis on can't. It cannot. Because as you know, there are millions of accounts. There are so many accounts you're keeping track of, and even more items that you have to keep track of. So you can't do it with just a normal spreadsheet software like Excel. You need a database software like Access in order to keep track of these different tables and the relationships between each of them. So if you could try to attempt this on Excel, but it's not going to be very efficient. Not only are you going to have to scroll through so many different different records. But if you want to relate one record to another, for example, again, you're trying to find a code in the list of customer order history in the table orders, that could take some time when you do it on Excel. But Access provides a very quick and easy way to see the relationships, to look up different relationships and quickly find those orders. So again, that's an explanation for why we are, why we may need to use Access instead of Excel, because especially for business applications, the more information you're holding on to, the more structured software you want to use. With that explanation out of the way, let's actually get into using Access. So again, I'm going to open up the application on my device. Once more, if you're using macOS, you're not able to download or run Access on your device. So any Apple devices, it won't work. Please make sure you're looking into the substitute options that I'm providing you. Okay, but to open up Access, again, I'm going to go to my Start menu. And of course, I have mine pinned here, but you could look for Access, ACCESS, and it's going to look like a red cylinder with an A on it. Go ahead and click it, and we're brought to a very familiar startup, which again, all Microsoft applications typically work this way, especially when creating a file. Okay, and to start a database, for this, we're just going to start a database. I'll explain some other things with the other downloads. But go ahead and click on Blank Database. And right off the bat, it's going to want you to save your database because, again, there is a lot of information you could hold with this. It's a lot more structured filed. Therefore, it wants you to save it immediately somewhere. Now, you'll notice this here, this long text with a lot of slashes, is your file path. So this indicates different folders that it's going to save it into, or in this case, there we go. It'll be in the documents folder. You can typically look at the very last one, last line here. That tells you what folder it's being saved to. If you want to change it, like in my case, again, I like doing it in my downloads folder. It's very easy for me to manage. Then you're going to click on the little folder icon here. It says browse for a location to put your database. Go ahead and click. There we go. And then you could go ahead and find the place you want to save it to. I want to go to my downloads, and if you want to rename the document here, you could. So let's go ahead and give it a name. Again, let me do Jasmine Ojeda demo. Make sure you're naming your own files properly according to your assignment. And then let's hit OK. But note the file extension here. So what kind of file it is? It says .accdb. That's your Microsoft Access database. And it's okay if this says 2007 or 2016 databases. That's just one of the more recent formats. Well, actually, it looks like there's more recent formats. But either way, it won't really matter for your assignments. The features have been very consistent. Okay. Let's hit OK. There we go. And of course, if you want to rename it again, but you don't want to go through that whole process, you could click into here and give it a name. Please don't edit this file extension. It could change the file to a completely different thing. But just edit the text before the period. And then you could confirm over here. We could see that it's now, again, looking at the last folder name here along with the dashes. It's being saved to my downloads. Perfect. So let's go ahead and hit create. And this is what it should look like when you start your database. Let me go ahead. If you're having a hard time looking at the text on your screen, don't worry, I'm also having a hard time. But note that you could go to here. You're going to go to your Home tab. Go to your text formatting. Click on the drop down for the font size. And you're going to go ahead and increase the font size to something that better fits your eyes. Let me make it quite big for us. There we go. I'll explain some other formattings that could help you out with, but again, I know these tables could be really small on the eyes. You could go ahead and click on, again, Home tab, text formatting, which is towards the right side of the ribbon, and then you could change the font size and it should update for everything. Okay. Go ahead and make sure you select the Table Fields tab once more, and let's dive right in. So what we're looking at here, again, I'll find another file to help describe different features, but what we're looking at is a table that Access has already set up for us. If you accidentally click out of this table, so you'll notice it kind of works like tabs over here. If you accidentally hit the X button, and there we go, let's just click yes. Oh, actually no, let's click no. Maybe you accidentally did that. Don't worry, you could still get a table again. Let's go to our create button. There we go. So go to the create tab and you'll see the group along the left called tables. There's one button called table. You'll go ahead and just click on it and it creates a new table for you. So that's just in case you accidentally exit out of it. And once more, let me change the font size so you could actually see what I'm doing. There we go. Okay. Now, notice this table, it looks like we only have 2 columns, 1 row, and you'll see that if you try to click anywhere else, it doesn't do anything. Again, Access is like Excel, but is a lot more pickier and a lot more structured. Keep that in mind and be very careful with what you do in Access, because one mistake could actually lead to a lot of issues. Okay, but remember, databases are made of tables. Let's say, for example, we want to make a table for students. We've already made the table, but remember, if we want to keep track of data, so before we even put any records in of students, we need to make fields. What kind of data are we keeping track of? So you'll notice in this table, we don't actually have anything other than the ID. So by default, Access always gives an ID to a table just so it could uniquely identify different fields. IDs are good because, again, maybe 2 students can have the exact same names. The only way we could differentiate between them is their student ID. Okay, speaking of which, so notice when I select ID, there we go. Let me go to my Table Fields tab once more. Perfect. Let's say the ID, we want to call it Student ID or maybe SID. You could change it by double clicking into the cell that says ID. There we go, and you could change it. So I'm going to put in Student ID, no space. When you name your fields, you typically don't want to do a space. There we go. And now it's named Student ID. If you're having a hard time seeing all of the text in there, how you format the rows and columns is the same you did with Excel. Notice I could go in between, there we go, the row here. I could go in between the edges. You get that little line with the arrows pointing to the sides, and I could click and drag it to be wider, or you could double click to auto fit it. So again, kind of like with Excel. Okay, so we have the student ID, and let me point your attention, actually before we do that, we want to add names to this. So we want to keep track of students' names. Well, to do that, let me auto fit this column over here. Oh, actually I can't. Let me try to fit this. There we go. So let's just make this drag open. But your last column will always say click to add. What this means is if you click, Then it'll start helping you set up your next field. Now there's something important about fields. So the reason why Access is very structured is because it wants to know what kind of data are you putting into that field. You'll notice it gives you a drop down for different data types. Is what you're keeping in there a short text? Is it a number? Is it currency? So are we keeping track of money in this? Is it a date and time? And so on. So this is very important. You want to make sure you get the correct data type in. So you really have to plan out how your database is going to look like before you get these fields started. Otherwise, you're going to have to start from scratch. In the case of creating fields for names, we probably just want a short text. So go ahead and select short text. And you'll notice the text we get a new field that occurs. It immediately gives a name, field 1, but notice it's highlighted. We could rename it, let's call it first name, no space. And when you click enter, it immediately takes you to the next column, and we could keep on adding more fields. So let's do the last name. So again, short text. Type in last name, no space. And I'm going to hit enter again. Maybe that's all I want. I could just click away to get rid of, there we go, those options. And let me auto-fit these two columns. So let me select this one, put my cursor in between the columns, double click. Same over here, select the column, put my cursor in between, double click, and it auto-fits. Okay. So we've gone ahead and created different fields for our entries. If you accidentally put in the wrong data type, no worries. Let me put your attention up here to go ahead and select the field. So again, I've selected the actual name up here at the top, and go to your Table Fields tab. The information here in the Properties group and the Formatting gives information about the field itself. So how are we getting that data? And you'll notice in the Formatting group, you have a text box for data type. You could click on the drop down and change the data type if needed. So short text, long text, however you need it. So you could still edit it even if you created it. Okay. Now let's go ahead, let's put a new field for maybe number of classes. So I'm going to do click to add. It's just going to be a number. It's a number data type. And let's put just classes for short. And let me auto fit it so you could see what's on my screen. Okay. Notice the classes gives a 0 by default because we've set the data type to number. So again, very structured way in which we're keeping track of data. Okay. Now let's go ahead and put in, so let's say this is all we want to keep track of for our students, just their first and last name and how many classes they have. Then we could go ahead and start typing in our records. Records is anything below the field names. So you'll notice over here on the left side, there's a little asterisk along this last row, this last record. And it has a little green fill to it, not green, yellow fill to it. Formally, that's called the append row. The last row, just know that the last row is where you could always add a new record. Okay, and if we want to start adding in, you could click into the cells down here and start typing. Before you start typing, one thing I do want to note, if you go to your student ID field, you'll notice the data type says auto number. What this means is we don't have to type in the ID here. As long as we go to the other cells and start typing, it will start at 1 and then keep incrementing as we add on. You'll see what I mean in a moment. So if you followed along and you want to start typing in, just go to the cell for the first name, so in the first row, and let me do it for myself. You just start typing, so Jasmine, and it all still works like how you did with Excel. So you could tab over or click over to the next column, the next column, the next cell, and keep on typing. Ojeda. And we go to the next one, and let's say I have 4 classes. And if that's all the rows, if that's the only record you want to do, you could just click away, or here, let's click enter. There we go. Perfect. And now we have our first record. And if we want to add more, maybe this one is one for Bobby McGee. Then again, you just go in, Bobby McGee, and maybe Bobby has 3 classes. And then you could just keep adding more and more records. And notice the more we add, the student ID increments up because it was set to the data type auto number. So keep that in mind. If you try clicking in here and changing it, there we go. Notice that Access gets angry with me and it doesn't want that. If you did want to put in your own unique ID, you're going to have to change the data type to number or text if that's what you want. But once you change it, you can't go back to auto number. So just be careful with that. Again, once you change it and you want to go back to auto number, you may need to start from scratch. Okay. So that's setting up your fields and doing some simple records. Let's go ahead and do some other things, such as formatting your fields. For example, go ahead and select the column for first name. There we go. And usually names aren't that long. They don't typically take up, let's say, 100 letters, or we call that, when it comes to databases, 100 characters. They're not typically that long. When it comes to creating databases, we want to make sure that it's not taking up too much space in your storage. And occasionally, maybe space is taken up because someone accidentally put in a bunch of letters. So maybe someone accidentally had their keyboard stuck on E and it just keeps going forever. Not only is that annoying to have to correct, but it could take up space in your computer or in the server that's holding the database. So to counter this and to counter accidents from occurring, we could format how much characters are kept in this field. That is something called field size. So notice in your table fields tab in the properties group, there's a little box for field size. Right now it says 255. That means you could put 255 characters into the data. If we want to shorten that, maybe no longer than 20 characters, that includes spaces, then you just go in there, edit it to 20. And if you get this message from Microsoft Access, don't worry. It's basically just giving a warning of, hey, if we have stuff already in this database that's longer than 20 characters, we're going to have to chop off some things. If you're okay with that, click yes, which for us, we're typically okay. Let's go ahead and click yes. And it lets you create those changes. Same thing with the last name. Let me select it. Let's change it to 20 characters. So again, as long as you select the field or even a cell in that field, you could change its properties and the formatting. So let's change the field size to 20. It'll give you that error. Make sure you click yes. There we go. So that's field size. Another thing is you'll notice here in the properties, there's a button called name and caption. Go ahead and click on it. There we go. And you'll see that this is another way to rename your field. So notice if the first name, if I just did F name, so let me get rid of the erst, and I click OK. Notice that the field name changes here to F name. Go ahead and click on a name and caption again. Okay, so again, that's another way to rename your fields. But the caption is kind of a nickname you could give the field. Like for your project, A lot of the captions I give you is just the name, but with the space. And in the description, it could be a quick description of what you're keeping track of in the field. So especially if you're using acronyms, this would be a good way to put in like, hey, this is what the acronym means. Okay. For your projects, you don't have to worry about descriptions, but again, it could be something to help out maybe someone else working on the database. But one note, you may be wondering, Ms. Ojeda, why are we doing no space for the name, but a space for a caption? Putting no spaces for the names is actually a common practice when it comes to databases and even coding. So again, databases are not just good for keeping track of data. Usually data analysts or administrators use these names to code specific programs for getting their job done, seeing different trends, or just adding more structure to the database. It's easier to work with stuff without spaces than stuff with spaces. So that's why we keep this practice. Just make sure, again, the names itself, no spaces, no punctuations. In the caption, you could go all in. Okay. When I hit OK, so again, we give the name, the field name, and the caption. Let's hit OK. And you'll notice here in the field, it shows the caption for the column. That's perfectly fine and perfectly expected. Again, captions can help you better name your fields without changing. Let me go back to the name and caption. The actual name that maybe programmers will use. Okay. And then you could change that for each of these columns. So I could skip over to last name. There we go. Go to your name and caption. And I want to leave the name like that, but the caption, let's do last space name. Click OK. And now let's go to the classes. We're going to go to our name and caption group. And the caption, let's put number of classes. And in the description, we'll say the number of classes the student is enrolled in. There we go. And let's go ahead and click OK. And let me autofit so it gets all of that caption. Okay. And notice the description isn't shown here, but you could always go back to the name and caption and see what the description was given. Okay. Now that is formatting your fields. Just make sure you are very precise with how you format it before you do the next steps I'm going to show you. Make sure you have everything right, double check, triple check, and along with the information you add in, double check, triple check before you move on with your next steps. Okay. And of course, I haven't shown this yet, but once you're done or at any point you want to save this table, you could go ahead, click on your save button up at the top left, or do your Control S. When you save a table for the first time, it's going to want you to name it. So perfectly fine. Let's call this students. Oh, that's not how you spell students. There we go. And click OK. And now you'll see here on the left, we have a table called students. And let's go ahead and close out with our X. There we go. Just in case you want to work on something else. To open the table up again, you'll go over here on the left pane that says all access objects. Go to your table, so in our case it's called students, and you could double click and it brings you back to where you started. And again, any changes you make, you could change it, and then you could go ahead and click on save. And you could exit out and you're good to go. Okay, go ahead and go to the students and right click on it. Notice you do have options you could do for students. For example, if you need to rename the table, you could do it from here. If you need to delete it, there we go. You could delete it. All right. So you've learned how to add fields, edit them, and enter your data. Now these next things are going to help you with, one, understanding some access objects, which is stuff that's over here on the left pane, and also how to add in more data without having to type it in. So if you're following along, let me exit out of this file. So you could just go ahead and click on your X button at the top right to close. We're going to go back to your resources pages, and I'm going to have you download a couple of files, starting with just the last one, College of Science classes. This one we're not going to edit, we're just going to take a look at. So go ahead and download it. There we go. And again, if you have the downloads like this, you could go ahead and open the file, or you could go to it in your downloads folder in your file system and double click, it'll open it up. So let's do open file. And if it gives you this message, no worries. It's just, again, there's a lot of things you could do with Access that some of it, if it gets in the wrong hands, someone can do some harm on your computer. The downloads I give you are all safe. So go ahead and click OK. There we go. And if you have this security risk message, you could go to the X to close it. There we go. And you could go ahead and explore this page, this database. So the reason why I had you download this file is because you'll notice in the left pane, the all access objects, there are tables, queries, forms, and reports that you can look at. These are the different kinds of files you could create in Access. For example, the tables is how I showed you what to create. We could double click into the classes. There we go. And you'll notice that we get all of our data for the classes here. The reason why it's all squished is because, again, I have my fonts set such a big size. You'll notice that sometimes you'll get these weird number formattings in the middle. If that happens for any of your applications, it just means that the column is too small for, the text is too big for the column to hold. So you could just select that column and autofit it. A quick way to autofit, go ahead with the table. There's a top left cell that you could select and it chooses everything. And at the end, the last column, you could go in between the columns, double click, and it autofits everything. And you could use the little slider down here to go over left and right. Oh, this one didn't autofit. Let me go ahead. Yeah, let me just manually open it up. There we go. Okay. Yeah, you'll notice there's different tables you could open up. You can even open up multiple tables at once. Let me open up the one for departments, so just double click. And you'll see, there we go. You could see the departments, same as instructors, and each of them appears as a different tab on your screen. If you want to close them, you could just click the X. And it asked me if I want to save the layout changes. Yes, I do. Let's click yes. Let me close this and this with the X. There we go. So you can have different tables. Real quick explanation about these other entries. Queries, double click on the classes by term and year. Queries are a quick way to search for stuff in tables. So you could create your own queries. And in this case, it's asking enter fall or spring. If I enter fall, click OK. Then it asks me another year. Let's see if 2019 occurs. Click OK. And there we go. It's saying, oh, actually this one is saying that the code isn't working. That's perfectly fine. But queries will go ahead and give you a list of list of data it wants to ask. And usually with that data, it'll go ahead and find everything related to that data and put it in this table. It doesn't give us anything because it seemed like it wasn't working in the meantime with the code. Let me close out of this query with the X. Okay. Forms, go ahead and double click on forms. You'll notice it kind of looks like a form that you would fill out, and that's exactly what it is. You could go ahead and type in information about, in this case, a new instructor we're acting in, and you could use the buttons down here to interact with the form. So like print current instructor, you could go ahead and add the instructor or print out the information. Close form looks like it'll close it for us. There we go. But we could create our own forms to make it easier to add in new records or to do things with records without having to actually open up the table. Okay, the last one, class report by department, go ahead and double click. This one also works as queries. So let's say we want to do, there we go, let's do for fall. Enter a 4-digit year. I did not take a look at the years. Let's see if 2010 works. Click OK. And it does show nothing because it seems like our departments, if I double click, may not be by year. Let's find what the year. These do 2022. Okay. Now let's try that out so you could actually see some action. So let me close out of here, go to reports, double click, and let's do fall. Okay. And then it's 2022. Let's do okay. And it doesn't seem like it's showing anything either. Could be that the code's not working or there's nothing to display, but queries, so the difference between reports and queries is queries, it'll show it as a table. So like how we do with the structuring a table. Reports will print out the data in a more appealing fashion. So you'll notice this one is a lot more nicer looking than, let's say, the tables here. Okay, so those are reports. Again, queries, forms, and reports is stuff we could create in Access. And actually in chapter 4, I provide information for how to do queries. But just know, all we have to worry about is tables for now. We're just going to focus on tables. Okay, so that is a quick introduction of different objects that we could create with databases. Go ahead and exit out of this database, so this file, by clicking on the X at the top right. There we go. And I'm going to have you download 2 files for this next part. So download the Central Sierra database. You could go ahead and open it up immediately. And let's click the X, there we go, for no security warning. And I'm going to have you go back to your resources page and download this Excel file, the Central Sierra data file. Go ahead and download it. And this one you don't have to open, but let me show you something real quick. In the Central Sierra file, again the one that you open, go ahead and double click on the employees table and let me autofit everything. There we go. So again, auto-fitting everything, I selected the cell at the top left, and then anywhere I could go ahead to between columns and double click. Okay. You'll notice in this employees table, we don't have any records, but we have fields already set up for us. If you go to the table fields tab in your ribbon, each one has their own data type and formatting when it comes to, there we go, in this case just the data type. I'm going to have you exit out of your table. It asks for changes because I did an autofit. Let me do yes. Okay. So I could type in the employee information on my own. It could take some time, but I could type it in. Or let me have you, here, let me open up my file explorer. Oh, let me pull it into this screen. And I'm going to have you open up that Excel file that we just had. So that's the Central Sierra data file. It's opening up in another screen for me. Let me bring it in. And go ahead, you don't have to actually click enable editing. I just want you to take a look at this. So again, we did mention that you could keep track of data in Excel, and sometimes that's how databases start. You may keep track of certain things through an Excel spreadsheet or some kind of spreadsheet or another file. And we'll notice that, hey, either this isn't enough to, Excel is not enough to keep track of a whole list of employees, or this is just temporary data holding. You don't have to type in every single one of these into the employees table in Access on your own. Access provides a way to bring that data in. To do that, make sure you have the Excel file closed. So let's hit the close button at the top right. We want to make sure it's closed, otherwise this will not work properly. And also make sure the table that you want to bring the data into is closed. So in this case, the employees, make sure it's closed. So you should have a blank screen like this. Go to your external data tab in your ribbon, and you'll find one of the left groupings is called import and link. There's a button called new data source, and when you click on it, it gives you different options. What this button will do is it'll allow you to bring in data from another file. So that could be an Excel file, it could be another Access file, it could also be just a text file. You'll locate the file format by going through each of these options. So notice if I do from file, it gives me an option for Excel and even an HTML document, which is a website. And there's another one for text. If you go to the other options, it gives you more files that you could import from, or even this one says online services, websites that you can import from. We just want to bring what we saw in the Excel file into the table. So go ahead and go to from file and click Excel. And you should get a screen that pops up that looks like this. Let me go ahead and expand it for everyone to see. There we go. So this is how we import data from another file. Your first step you want to do is the file name up here, this text box. This is for finding the file you want to bring the data in from. To do that, go to the Browse button here on the right, click on it, and you'll navigate to the file, again, that you want to get the data from. So for me, that was the Excel file that I downloaded. That's in my downloads folder. There we go, and that's a Central Sierra data file. Go ahead and select it and click Open. Perfect. Now let me bring your attention down here to these different options. So these options that you could switch between. What these options are is how are we going to import this data? The first option right now that is currently selected says import the source data into a new table in the current database. So if you choose this one, this will actually get the data from the Excel file and create a whole new table in our database. Right now we don't want that. We actually want to add on to the employees table, the one that we already created. Go ahead and select the second option, append a copy of the records to the table. This will allow you to add the data into an existing table. The text box over here indicates what table you want to choose. Since the only one is employees, you have employees here. So you just want to double check it has a table name. If you have multiple tables in your database, you'd have to click on the drop down and select it. Okay, but again, make sure you have append a copy of the records to the table chosen with employees in the text box, then hit OK. These following steps we don't have to do much. This is just confirming that this is the data we want to import. So you could see, check, oh yes, this is the data I want. Click Next. And just make sure the Import to Table says employees or the table name you want. And you could just click Finish. And in this window you could just close out of. If you don't get any error messages, this means that it should have gone through perfectly. Now when I open up the employees table, watch as it is filled up with different entries. Let me autofit this to get rid of those numbers. There we go. But it's gone ahead and added in our entries. Perfect. So that import only works if the table you are importing to, so in this case employees, has fields matching up with the one in the Excel file. So you need everything in the correct order with the correct data, otherwise this will not go through properly. Okay, so keep that in mind. The import still works if you already had entries added into the table. It'll just add on to the very end. So it'll append it, add on to the end. But that's a quick way. Again, especially for your assignments, you're going to be using the import feature a lot because I don't want to put you through typing in every single little thing. But this is also common practice because a lot of times, again, we start out with an Excel file. A lot of times we start out with an Excel file and then we need to put it into Access. Okay. So once more, just make sure you're taking it nice and easy and slow, and everything should be a-okay. If you are If you come to a point where you feel like you're completely lost with instructions, I do highly suggest starting from the beginning, or at least the point where things were working accordingly, because all of the instructions in the assignments depend on each other. Every action you do depends on each other because Access is very picky. Okay. So that's importing data. One of the last things I'm going to show you is more on the fun side. So you could make sure you have your table open. You don't have to select anything in particular. Just go to your, it should be the Home tab. There we go. I'm getting my things mixed up. But go to your Home tab, and remember, as you saw me increasing the text size of this table, you have the text formatting here on the right group, and you could still change the text size if you need. Like I can make it smaller, make it bigger for your eyes, and then you could go to the font group and you could change the font style that's being used. That one's a little fancy. Okay. But notice anytime we change the text formatting, it changes for the entire table because everything has to stay consistent. Even if I bold everything, there we go, it does it for all. No matter what I select, it's going to do it for all of the entries, even the underline and the text color. So just keep that in mind. It's not as creative as you could get with Excel, but once more, it's a database. It has to be consistent. Okay, but one fun thing you could do and you're going to do in your project is in the text formatting group, go to the options drop down. So you'll notice the little arrow on the bottom right of the group says datasheet formatting. Click on it. And this is a way in which you can format the entire sheet and how it's set up. The biggest thing being the background color and the alternating background. For those who are able to see on their screens, you may notice that the fields, the records are alternating in colors from white to gray. You could change that color by changing the background color. So notice the background color is set to white. I could click on the drop down and let's do like a light blue. There we go. And the alternate background color is what the alternating grays are currently. I could click on the drop down and let's just do a darker gray. There we go. And the grid lines is the colors of the lines in the grid, so the borders. You could click on the drop down, and if I want it more formatted, you could let's do this very dark gray. And you can see the preview here in the sample of how it changes. If this is to your liking, you'll go ahead and click OK, and it changes your screen for you. So that's some very quick formatting, quick and easy. It's not as tedious as, let's say, with Excel. All you have to do is Home tab, go to your text formatting group, select the little options, the datasheet formatting on the bottom right, and you can change the background color, alternate background color, and even the grid line. Apologies, that is my dog. Okay. And of course, when you are done with all of your changes, you've added in data, you've added in fields and such, always do your Control S or click on the Save button at the top left. That will save your table. Click on the X, and then you can exit out of your database. There we go. So that's Access Chapter 1. Again, take it easy, take it slow, and don't worry. Even in the assignment instructions, I try to provide instructions for some of the more minute details. But if you have any questions or concerns, feel free to reach out to me. All right? Have a good one.